Hi, my name is Cyrus and I'm your host. Welcome to the PAN podcast. For today's conversation, I had the great pleasure to speak with Dr. Luke Wilson. Luke is a general practitioner and is board certified by the International Board of Lifestyle Medicine. On top of that, Luke holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in psychology, and he is a board director and the New Zealand ambassador for Doctors for Nutrition. Next to all these achievements, the main reason I reached out to Luke is because he's also the co-author of the Broad study. Now, some of you might know about that study because we published a 3-part video series covering the Broad study and its massive success as a randomized controlled weight loss trial. If you haven't watched these videos yet, I invite you to do so because it's super interesting and definitely worthwhile to take a closer look at the Broad study. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Luke Wilson.
Yeah, Luke, thanks so much for being here. I'm very, very excited to speak to you because you're one of the co-authors of the Broad study, which I said that just a few minutes ago, but I'll repeat that once again. I just think that's one of the most brilliant studies I've ever read. And it's when you published this in 2017, it was the most successful weight loss trial ever conducted without mandating regular exercise and without caloric restrictions. So people were able to eat as much as they wanted to, and they still lost a lot of weight. Their BMI went down, their waist circumference went down, and that was a really, really exciting study. I was very excited to read it, at least, and I think many more people might benefit from hearing about it. So, and I want to get into the Broad study specifically as well, but first, maybe let's talk about how you got into that whole field of nutritional medicine or lifestyle medicine. How you get interested in even conducting a study like this, because this is not a regular thing. This is something quite out of the ordinary, and I'm always super interested to understand and to hear how people get to these extraordinary places. So what got you interested in it, and how did you get into that field of nutritional medicine?
Yeah, so I guess I started medicine. I started kind of late with that, and so by the time I was interested in medicine, I already had quite a strong interest in just health generally, and so my assumption, to be honest, I didn't really have a lot of experience with doctors and hospitals except for seeing my own general practitioner a few times when I was a kid. And so my assumption was that medicine would be all about, obviously using medication when we needed to, but also I thought that it would be, at least my interest in how people could be more healthy would also be really useful within the field of medicine. So it would not just be about treating disease, it would also be about keeping people healthy. And so I already had sort of a strong interest in that. And basically when I was at medical school, it must have been I think it was my second or my third year. And at that point, it was during the swine flu pandemic. And I was, pretty much, I'm pretty sure that it went for our entire flat in Dunedin. So I had, I was living with 4 others there. And one of the girls actually was a nutrition, doing dietetics and nutrition. And she had never been sick. Apparently she'd never had a flu, and she got it. And then the rest of us all got it in quick succession. So I suspect it was probably that variant. But anyways, during the time that I was at home, I was at the time very interested in President Barack Obama's campaign, and especially his healthcare reform bill, and so Affordable Care Act and all that. So I was looking on a website about that and reading a few articles and things. And at one point I scrolled down to the comments section, and someone in the comments section said, "Well, President Obama, he should really be reading this book called The China Study, because it tells you, like how he could really make a big difference in the health of Americans," or something along those lines. And I was like, the China Study, I've never heard of that before. And so I Googled it and came up with, I think, the Wikipedia article on it and sort of describing what it was. And turned out it was this massive study on nutrition. And I was already pretty interested in nutrition and health because I was interested at that point well, I have been for quite some time and going to the gym, working out, all that kind of thing. So I thought, protein was super important. And I was actually already vegetarian at that point, but, I was doing all I still could to get that really important protein. So I had my whey protein container and everything like that on top of the fridge, and doing all that kind of thing. So I thought what was really important for nutrition and health was especially your protein intake. So I I managed to find a copy online of the China study. Downloaded that from somewhere, and I started reading it, and it just fascinated me from the start because it was covering all of these diseases that we'd already learned about in medical school, but particularly the emphasis on cancer, because cancer always seemed to me to be, if there was one condition that was just straight up bad luck and nothing you could do about it really, it would be cancer. And so I suppose, yeah, I found the book really fascinating, and I'm pretty sure that I got through it almost in one sitting. I was just scrolling through it, and just all of the information it had in there. I was especially interested in the information it had about heart disease, because that was also another condition that I found really interesting, being, of course, if you look at the stats, sort of the number one killer and things like that. And so I thought if something was able to prevent or even reverse heart disease, is what it was saying in the China study, that was really something that I wanted to find out more about. I guess the other thing too was that, being vegetarian, I'd always thought, it's nice that I started that when I was a kid, and I had no idea about the health effects really, or anything like that. That wasn't really an interest of mine. And then I suppose at this point I was like, well, I was almost apologetic for it in some ways. I was like, well, this is what I do. It's probably not as good for you because I can't have all of this lean chicken breast and all these things that you need to get the protein and to look like the guys on the cover of Men's Health and all this kind of stuff. But I do the best I can, and I still eat eggs, so I can have egg white. But what this book was saying essentially was that it's almost not only being vegetarian was perhaps even healthier for you than being omnivorous, but it was saying that, in fact, if I became even more plant-based or vegan, if you like, then that would be even healthier. And a lot of the things that I was adding in, making real effort to make sure I was having, like the eggs and like the whey protein and the dairy, I would be healthier if I cut them out. And so that was a really fascinating concept to me. And just some of those tables that he has in there, where it sort of shows, per this many servings of animal products versus this many servings of vegetables and fruit and whatnot, what your actual nutrient breakdown is from them, and how the plant-based foods, just nutritionally, you're getting more iron, you're getting the same amount of protein, all this kind of thing. I just found that fascinating.
This idea of the package deals, right? It's interesting that we have this concept that certain foods are protein foods and certain others aren't. But it's such a this I think Professor Campbell also describes this in his more recent book, where he speaks about this reductionism approach that we have to nutritional sciences, which I think is interesting, that nutritional sciences sort of stems from finding specific nutrient deficiencies, for example, vitamin B1 deficiency. And then we know, okay, beriberi can exist, that disease that you get from a B1 deficiency. And then that's how nutritional sciences sort of evolved. And I think we sometimes still have that view of how can we not become deficient in a certain nutrient, instead of looking at the big picture, looking at these package deals.
100%. Yeah, so it was a whole new paradigm, you see, from everything, because everything I had read about nutrition up until that point, and I'd read, pretty widely on it, I felt, at that point. And so I was doing things like, taking a multivitamin and all these kinds of things, because to make sure I got enough of all the isolated nutrients. And so I did have that reductionist approach. But yeah, so that sort of got me started thinking about things. And basically I just took it from there. I'd always been very interested in looking at the research myself. So I wanted to make sure that it was all, it wasn't just, that it was all, a lot of it sounded too good to be true. And so I wanted to look into it further myself, certainly before I was going to tell anyone else about this, or further on down the track, think about talking to patients or anyone like that about this. So I, looked into some of the articles that were cited in there, and I was especially interested in finding out more about Dr. Esselstyn's research, particularly, and Dr. McDougall, who's also mentioned in the book, I believe. So I ordered those books from Amazon and or wherever it was back in those days, and I started reading all of that, everything, basically catching up everything that I'd missed out on, that had been written up till that point, on all this stuff. And so that's really where I became very interested in things. And like I said before, the cardiovascular disease aspect of it was really, I found that really interesting, because you could actually see the changes on the angiograms and things, and not only that, but that the changes that people would happen within, days or weeks, rather than necessarily, when we were taught about cardiovascular disease, this was very much something that developed over a lifetime, and so it just got worse as you got older, and some people were lucky with it, some people not so lucky, that kind of thing. So Dr. Esselstyn's book I found really fascinating, and it happened that Dr. Esselstyn was, I must have been on his website looking, and I saw that he was coming to New Zealand, and so I made an effort to be at the conference that he was speaking at, which was for the CHIP program, the Complete Health Improvement Program. And so I went up to that, and there was one other medical professional that was there, who was a nurse, and it was me. And I wasn't even a medical professional at that point. I was a medical student, and so I remember Hans Deal was there, and Hans Deal was talking or something, and I saw this gentleman sort of sneak in the back, and I turned around, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's Dr. Esselstyn. And so I was pretty stoked to have the opportunity to hear him speak, and also got the opportunity to talk to him. And I remember went over, everyone was eating lunch and things, and I went over to his table, and he was there with Anne, his wife, and I remember sitting down there and starting talking to him, and he's like, oh, so why did you come here? And I was like, oh, I came here to see you. And he's like, oh, he's quite taken aback, he's quite stoked. This is before, before, I suppose, well, actually, the funny thing was that on the I must have been the first or the second night of the conference, he's like, oh, we've got a bit of a surprise for you guys. There's a movie coming out that we're in, and it hasn't really been seen much before. And I was like, in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, this must be Forks Over Knives. And so he put on a DVD of Forks Over Knives for us, and that was, how long ago this was before that even came out. And so I guess that's really when people started to, probably the work of Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. Colin Campbell is sort of under the microscope in that documentary. And so that was probably when things really started to take off, and more people started to know about Dr. Esselstyn and his work and things. So I was right there at the start of things, which was cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, that was actually, so that's funny. Yeah, I actually, so I got interested in specifically plant-based nutrition as well after watching Forks Over Knives. I think my brother showed that to me after one Christmas must have been around 2000. I think it was 2013. And at
Right.
that Christmas, and we had sort of this huge Christmas feast, and my brother and I always loved to cook together. And we cooked burgers, and we made our own French fries and all that stuff. And I felt really bad after. I think it was after, must have been after New Year's Eve, maybe. So Christmas and then New Year's Eve. And I remember being at my mother is a pharmacist, and we were at her pharmacy, and I felt really bad after eating all this stuff. And then my brother was like, "Hey, let's watch that movie." He had just recently seen it maybe a week or two before. And then in that state of feeling, pretty bad from eating all that stuff, we watched Forks Over Knives. And as I told you before, my brother is a behavioral psychologist. So the day afterwards, he said, "So let's actually do that," because I had watched it and I was like, "Yeah, okay, maybe that's a really cool idea, but I'm never going to eat like this." And then we cooked together, and that's sort of started my journey when it comes to really. Because I was also always I was interested in nutrition. I've been interested in nutrition for a very long time, but I really hadn't found anything that worked for me. So this was also, it's interesting that this is sort of a similar way how you got interested in it by being introduced to Dr. Asselson and to Colin Campbell, because that also sparked my interest in this field of local plant-based nutrition. Yeah. And I thought the documentary was really powerful because it also show how you can actually improve patients' lives on in a practical setting as well. Yeah.
No, it does. Like when I saw that, I was just like, this is going to change everything. This is massive. And it did, just not as quickly as I thought it would. I guess you're always a little bit sort of more, what's the word? You're sort of more hopeful about things when you're younger, I guess, a little bit more naive about the way that things actually work. But yeah, so that must have been, I feel like that was around 2010.
Okay.
And so then in our last year of medical school, we get to choose to do an elective somewhere. Be the worst time for people to be doing that now, because everyone always goes overseas, and you get to, that's part of the experience. Everyone just always really looks forward to that. And by this point, I'd learned all about, Dr. Esselstyn, Colin Campbell, Dr. McDougall, Dr. Ornish, and so I wanted to go to the States, and I wanted to spend some time with some of those pioneers, I guess, learning about and seeing how this would actually work with patients, because it's all well and good to read the book or to even to see it in Forks Over Knives, but until you've really seen it with your own eyes, it still kind of feels a little bit unreal in some ways. So Dr. Esselstyn doesn't do programs or anything like that. I think his thing is to do like a 1-day seminar, or maybe 1 or 2 days at that point. And so it wasn't really an opportunity to go and study with him in Cleveland or anything, because we needed to be based at, I suppose, a clinic or a hospital or something like that. And so the first person that I ended up approaching, because I knew that McDougall did the 10-day program, so I was like, well, that's 10 days at least that I can. So got in touch with them, and they were like, again, I think it was early enough that they were really surprised and stoked that there'd be someone coming from, this part of the world. And so they were really keen to have me there. So that was great. And then I just had the problem of, well, what do I do for the rest of this 3 months? That's not the 10-day program. And I hadn't heard of True North before, but turns out they're just, as it happens, walking distance from where McDougall runs his program. So I emailed Dr. Goldhammer there and managed to get into a 3-month internship there, with the dispensation, obviously, that I'd be allowed to go out to Dr. McDougall at the time. And there were no issues with that. And so that was what I did for my elective in my last year of medical school, and that really changed everything. I think that's really when I realized this was for real, and just to see the results that the patients were getting and how happy they were. And it was so different. You yourself, you've done, I don't know how many years you do a medical school there.
Yeah, we do 6 altogether with that.
same as us. So you've had sort of like 5, almost 6 years of seeing how it works usually, which is you're lucky if there's really much change. There's a few things we do in medicine that are really life-changing, like, obviously some hip replacements, or if someone comes in with a raging infection and we're able to give them antibiotics or something like that, or someone comes in with an asthma attack and you're able to settle that down for them. So there's certainly things that, you do see these miraculous changes in conventional medicine too, but for the most part, it's fairly dull as far as, and you don't really see a lot of, there's not a lot of joy in it a lot of the time. So I guess it was just a huge contrast from what I'd experienced during my medical school training. And so I really thought, well, this is really lucky. I've got this opportunity that now I can take this back to New Zealand, and I can teach other people about this and promote, what's possible with whole food plant-based nutrition. So I just saw it as the way that I could have the most impact. And make the, I guess I was lucky to stumble. If you think about how I stumbled upon this in the first place, I was just reading comments on like an article. How crazy is that? So that could very well have never happened. And so the whole thing has just been so like just the timing of it has all been, for me, I just feel like I've been so lucky, so fortunate. It's all been so perfect. That I just happened to read Dr. Esselstyn's book, and then he happened to be coming to New Zealand a few months later, and then just happened to be able to get in touch with Dr. McDougall at the time before everything really became quite crazy with all of that, because obviously once Forks Over Knives and some of the other documentaries, and just as time has gone on, more and more people have heard about this, and so now even places like True North, much more difficult to get to be an intern there. Whereas when I went, everyone was so excited and interested in everything, because gosh, here's someone coming from New Zealand of all places. This must be getting out there, and you can just see with I was supervised by Dr. Clapper at True North, and he's brilliant as well, but he hasn't written a whole bunch of books, so I hadn't heard as much about him. But you can just see for Dr. McDougall, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Clapper, it's kind of like the struggle that they've been, they've been saying this for years and years and years, and they can just see, I felt like they could kind of see a little bit in, by me being there, that finally that things were starting to, get out to the wider world, and that maybe something would come of all this after all, which I think is super positive.
Yeah. That's very interesting to hear how you got into this, and also meeting all these people. I mean, at the I've met Dr. Clapper at VegMed in London. I've had the opportunity to talk to him. He's such a nice person, such a sweet man, and he's been doing such great work. So for people who are listening who don't know about True North, I mean, this is a clinic where they've practiced fasting for decades now. I don't know for how long, maybe for around 30 years, maybe. I think they opened in the 80s.
Yeah, I feel like you're right. I think it wasn't even their first location, so they used to be somewhere else, and they'd moved to this newer location. So I think it was started by Doug Lyle and Dr. Goldhammer in the 80s.
So a physician and a psychologist. And I mean, this is even more far out of than plant-based nutrition. They do water fasting, and they do really crazy stuff. But they are and now fasting is becoming more en vogue.
I know,
en vogue sort of thing as well, right? So these things that it's so interesting.
Funny.
Now you talk about, huge organizations are talking about the fact that, for example, the EU as well is talking about the fact that we should be reducing our meat, red meat consumption. And these people have been sort of, people like Alan Goldhammer or Doug Isle, they've been talking for such a long time about a plant-based nutrition, about a more plant-based dietary approach, and about fasting as well. And now we have these, people on Instagram talking about their water fast, or talking about doing fasting, and it's becoming a thing. And it's so interesting that they've been doing this for such a long time. And as you say, without being really heard or understood. And I can imagine that must have been quite thrilling for them to see you as a medical student, as a young person interested in these things. That were kind of very at the sort of at the border of insanity.
Yeah, well, yeah, and even at that stage, it was something that I really played down, because you have to write an elective report, so so that the medical school can see that you've actually done something over that 3 months. Otherwise, people just go on long holidays, and sometimes people still do try to do that. But but basically, I sort of said, it does. Some people will even do a fast, but mostly it's about putting them onto this is a way of transitioning them onto a healthier diet and things. And so I played that down a little bit, just because I was a little bit concerned that otherwise I might get some questions about that. Fortunately, I don't even know whether they read it too much, to be honest, but it's there in the records somewhere at Otago Medical School, that report and things. And it was certainly, I think, fasting at the time was something that I didn't know much about. It's not really discussed much I don't think it's discussed at all in the China study. Although he does mention a little bit in Whole, which is the second book. And I think it's become, again, it's one of these things where if you think plant-based nutrition is pretty, because that used to be extreme, fasting is probably the next extreme. And that's probably, I want to say that fasting's acceptance is probably a good sort of 5 to 10 years behind plant-based nutrition. Although the ideas are certainly becoming more mainstream. And we did see some really good results with some patients there as well. But I was mostly interested in the diet, so I focused mostly on that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's more and more research coming out on fasting as well, right? Walter Longo has published paper after paper in journals like Nature, for example, or Cell as well. And I think they've come far from their yeast research to animal research, and now to research in humans. And there's actually a clinic here in Germany that's very very famous for their fasting programs as well. I did an internship there, and it's really fascinating to see how people with fibromyalgia, for example, benefit from fasting. And they do studies as well, of course, to see whether these things that you see practically, that you see in patients, whether you can actually see this on a broader scale as well, when you study it in a clinical setting. So I think, I think this trend with intermittent fasting, for example, as well, is now coming up. People see that there are benefits, and there's more and more data. But still, I think it's interesting to be able to speak to those people who have been doing it for such a long time, and to see these, really these pioneers in some of these fields. Even if people don't follow a whole food plant-based diet, this whole notion of eating more plant-based has definitely been accepted in a very, very wide the scientific environment as well.
It's come such a long way since, it has been, this is 10 sort of 11 years now since I first started reading and learning about this stuff. And the change between now, and what it was back then is phenomenal. I never would have imagined, I always say, because I've done presentations in New Zealand, that kind of thing, at conferences, and I'm always like, I never would have believed, if anyone had said that you'll be talking about this stuff to people, and people will want to, you might have a couple of hundred people, that you're talking to about this, who are appreciating it and finding it useful. I never would have believed that a few years ago. But it's all changed. So I think it's a really good thing. It's going to change medicine.
Okay, thank you very much for watching or listening to the first part of our interview. Now I wish you a great time with the second part, where we speak in depth about the broad study and uncover some of the really fascinating stories behind it that just cannot be told by a scientific paper, but that illustrate how positively impactful switching to a healthy plant-based diet can be in a person's life.